What's up guys, I got a brand new video for you today, and today we're looking at the Canon 6D Mark II. This is my full real world review because before I just did my first impressions video, and that was basically just kind of looking at the dynamic range between the original 6D and the 6D Mark II because there was a lot of noise on the internet saying that it had worse dynamic range, and the truth is it has slightly worse dynamic range than the 6D, but not like a million times worse. Anyway, as I said in that video, I was going to shoot with this for an entire month. I've had it now for basically an entire month. I've used it on client jobs, I've used it with friends, I got some models involved and we did some tests because I can't always do tests on client jobs. I don't want to waste their time. I didn't really use it for video too much just because I shoot pretty much everything in 4K now, and obviously this camera doesn't have 4K video. But let's get into the specs. It's a 26.2 megapixel full frame sensor. It has the Digic 7 image processor in it, which is the first for a full frame from Canon. It's got 45 autofocus points, all of them are cross type, 1080p 60 FPS, digital image stabilization. It's got the 3-inch flippy touchy screen, dual pixel autofocus. It's got a native ISO of 40,000, and you can expand that up to like 102,000, which I wouldn't do. It's got 6 frames per second continuous shooting, and that's up from the 4.5 on the original 6D. It's got time-lapse, it's got HDR, and the time-lapse is actually 4K, so it does have something in 4K. It's got built-in GPS, it's got built-in Wi-Fi, it's got built-in Bluetooth, and it's dust and water resistant. So starting off my review, I'm not gonna get too much into the dynamic range because obviously we did that test already. I will mention it a couple times throughout this video, but the dynamic range isn't anything to call home about. It's not insanely amazing in this camera. You are going to get amazing pictures with it. It's not like you can't take a good picture with this camera. If you know how to expose your image properly, it's not even that big of a problem. Now, the coolest thing about this camera is definitely the flip out touchscreen. It's so handy. I ended up using it way more than I thought I was going to use it. And because I'm getting so used to having an EVF, I found myself actually shooting quite a bit from the screen, doing some low stuff and different things like that. Anyway, I'm just going to shut up and show you some image samples because that's what you came here for. So as you can tell from the image quality, it's good. You're not really gonna have too many issues. I did find that when I was using some third-party lenses, I needed to do some micro calibrations to get it to properly focus where I wanted it to. But after that was set, I actually had a good time shooting with this camera. I guess the biggest issue is that it's 2017 and a lot of people were expecting a lot from this camera and weren't given a lot. They were just kind of given a slight spec bump from the original 6D. And the biggest spec bump is definitely the autofocus. So I want to talk about the autofocus system now. It's got 45 cross type. They're basically the same as what's inside of the 80D. I think they just stuck that autofocus system into this camera because you can kind of tell that the focus points are sort of all clumped together, and if it was on an APS-C size sensor, it would have filled the frame more. The single point autofocus is awesome on this camera. No problems. It's pretty much as good as it gets compared to any other camera I've used. I did find in a heavily backlit situation it struggled a little bit, but the worst was the zone focusing. I found it to be really inaccurate. I did some focus tracking with it and I really didn't even want to show you guys because it just wasn't turning out how I wanted it to. I did a video with my friend comparing this to the 5D Mark IV. That video is going to come a little later on after this one comes out. But we did some autofocus tracking just using the center point, and it held its own. It was just as good as the 5D Mark IV basically. That said, I wouldn't call this a sports camera. Obviously, it has 6.5 frames per second. The buffer fills up at around 20 to 22 shots in RAW. That's not crazy, but you get at least 3 seconds of action, so you can hold the shutter down, and it's okay. So obviously, when it comes to image quality, it's 26 megapixels, so it's up 6 megapixels from the 20 in the original 6D. Would I have rather had better dynamic range and stuck with the 20 megapixel sensor? I would probably say yeah. But at least you have some room to crop with this now, so if you need to move around, you got more resolution to do that with. That said, I bring up 2017 again. Other cameras in its same price bracket, like the X-T2, has better dynamic range, and it's an APS-C size sensor, and especially when it comes to different things like low ISO, where the camera should shine, kind of has an issue, but it's not too bad at recovering highlights. It's more when it comes to recovering shadows. So one other thing I want to look at is high ISO. A lot of you probably want to know how well it does. So let's take a look at some samples right now. Starting out with ISO 1600, it's nice and clean like you'd expect from a full frame camera. ISO 3200, still nice and clean, a little bit more grain coming in here. ISO 6400, lots of detail, there's a little bit more grain. ISO 12800, detail's nice, but you can definitely see grain in the shadows. And at 25,600, it's really grainy and the shadows have a magenta cast. Comparing it here with 1600, you can really see that. All right, so let's talk about video. I didn't really use this too much for video just because I shoot everything in 4K, and I brought this to a studio for a job I was doing. I used it as like a second or third camera. We had them all set up for shooting behind the scenes in a recording studio. And I did some shots with this and it looked all right. It's not too bad in low light. It's definitely gonna be better than some APS-C sensors in low light. Because it's 1080p and I shoot everything in 4K, I just really didn't use it. And even with that said, I found that the 1080p was not really all that good. It was kind of mushy. And that's comparing it to something like the GH5. You can see here side by side the Canon 6D Mark II versus the GH5. And you can definitely tell the GH5 is way sharper and way cleaner. So one trick up this camera sleeve is it has digital image stabilization. And it actually works really well. As you can see here, I'm walking beside a fence. And I just had it turned on. I had it set to the enhanced mode and I was just walking and I was at about 35 millimeters. And it actually looks not too bad. So when you have digital image stabilization enabled, there's two modes. There's on and then there's enhanced. And with each setting, it crops in just a little bit more on the image. So you start to actually lose the full frame when you use it. And I actually found on the enhanced mode that the image quality really wasn't quite as good. So one of you asked in my first impressions video if something like the Cine lenses from like Samyang will work. I have an 85mm here on the camera, and in the top left here you can see it's flashing no. And when you enable it and put it to enhanced, it still flashes no. So apparently you can't use digital image stabilization with these lenses. Now talking about dual pixel autofocus, because that's amazing on this camera. Using that in video, you can, you got touch to focus, you've got tracking, so you can click on an object. I did a test with my hand where I moved it in front of the frame, clicked on it, moved my hand around, it tracked it no problem. And when I took my hand out of the frame, it kind of just focused on whatever was in that area. Put my hand back in, it locked back on and followed my hand. So that's really good. So taking a look at face tracking, you can definitely see that it has no problem tracking my face. Moving around the frame here, it just locks right on. You will have a little bit of trouble in lower light situations, but it's not too bad outdoors. Turn my head to the side and it'll still track me. And basically it has no problem with this. The only issue for me is the different lenses you use on your camera. So I was using the Canon 24 to 72.8, which is an awesome lens, but I found that the dual pixel autofocus for face tracking was kind of all over the place. It was kind of like jumpy and not really all that smooth. I don't know if it's the lens I was using, but kind of made me go out and buy an STM lens, something I didn't really want to do. But I went out and bought the 40mm STM lens, and I found that the dual pixel autofocus with the STM lens is definitely a lot smoother. So taking a look at the app on my iPhone, obviously this camera has Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, and I'm actually changing the focus mode right here. You can go in and actually change the different drive modes, so that's continuous high. And this app is super full featured. You can change the white balance, and you can change all the regular settings just like your shutter speed, your aperture, and ISO. I found the latency is actually awesome. It's not that bad. And I've never actually seen an app have this many options. Changing over to video mode, you have some options like actually changing your frame rates and different things like that. You can even change the audio levels, which is crazy. That's something I've never seen. The autofocus mode, just tap to focus. And as you can see, the autofocus is actually pretty accurate and responsive. All right, so that's all the features I really want to get into. A lot of people have called this camera boring. I would say it's not boring, but it doesn't really wow me in any way. The one thing that was kind of cool is I did do a 4K time lapse, and you can check that out right now. So setting a time lapse up is super easy. You go to Timelapse movie, set it to either 4K or 1080p. Then you go to your intervals, which is when it's going to take a shot. So I'm going to take a shot every 2 seconds. It's going to take 600 shots. And basically you take a picture to start it to set your exposure so you know where it needs to be. And then you basically push start stop, you hit OK, and it'll start doing the time lapse. So that's basically the only thing you can do when it comes to 4K video. It does export a 4K video out of it. It looks really good. I just don't know why they wouldn't have included 4K video in the camera. It's kind of stupid. I know they're trying to protect their 5D Mark IV and cinema lines, but even if they had stuck 4K video in this camera, it wouldn't deter people from buying the 5D Mark IV because it still has more pro level features that this camera doesn't have, and it wouldn't really hurt it in any way. Anyway, let's talk about the things I like. Obviously the ergonomics, the button placement, the weight of the camera. It's a little bit lighter than something like a 5D Mark IV. It just feels good in the hand. It's good quality materials. It's the same as every Canon full frame camera. You know, it's built really well. It's got good weather sealing. The flip out touchscreen is a nice touch. And you know, if you want to vlog with this camera, if you're thinking about upgrading from like a 70D and you want a full frame camera to vlog with, you got the flippy touchscreen and even the digital image stabilization and face tracking. Dual pixel autofocus is really good on this camera. The battery life is amazing. I had this for one of the landscaping jobs I was doing, shooting them pretty much the entire day from like 12 p.m. to 9 p.m. And I only went through one battery. I was using live view a lot, doing some photos and videos, got like 800 shots, and I still had like a quarter battery life left, so it's actually really good. But that brings us to the things I don't like, and there's quite a bit of things I don't really like about this camera, and it's mostly just because of its price point and the time it's coming out. So the first thing is the single card slot, and it's only UHS 1. Canon, I don't know why you wouldn't put a UHS 2 card slot. Would have increased the buffer. It would have allowed this thing to offload photos way better. It's 2017. This is old technology, man. Like, come on. Dynamic range in the lower ISOs isn't that amazing. The dynamic range even in the high ISOs isn't that amazing. Just kind of it's a 4-year-old sensor. There's no headphone jack, there's no 4K video. The 1080p quality could be better, it's not amazing. The viewfinder's kind of small for a full frame camera. I was expecting it to be full coverage, but it's only like 98%. And the last thing is basically it's got 1/4000th of a second shutter instead of 1/8000th of a second. And you know, it doesn't have dual card slots, and a lot of cameras in this price bracket have those things. So it's hard for me to really recommend this camera if you're looking at something around this price bracket, especially if you're buying a new camera and you're not coming from a Canon already. Also, the focus points are all kind of clustered in the middle, so it's kind of annoying if you're trying to do something like rule of thirds. Even with your focus point over to the farthest end, you're still gonna have to do a slight focus and recompose. It doesn't have the joystick. You have to use the D-pad, which is in kind of an awkward spot. You have to take your hand and kind of bring it down. The joystick on like the 5D Mark IV and the 5D Mark II and the 5D Mark III are all in the right spot. With all that said, I know I made it sound like kind of a drag. You can get awesome images from it. I wouldn't worry about it. If you're upgrading from a 70D or an 80D, and you want to get into full frame, this is your guy. If you have a 5D Mark III, or even a 6D, I don't know if this is really the best upgrade. I guess maybe if you want the dual pixel autofocus and the flip screen, and that might be something you'd want. But to me, I think the upgrade path makes more sense to go to the 5D Mark IV. Obviously that camera is like $1,600 more, but you know, you're gonna get similar image quality either way. When it comes down to image quality, it's kind of subjective, and also how you take photos. If you like to underexpose, if you like to overexpose, I don't know. But if you know how to properly expose, not gonna have a problem. Anyway, I don't really have a conclusion to this video. If you're looking for a new camera in this price bracket, I'd rather recommend something like the X-T2 or the GH5, especially if you want 4K video and cameras that have slightly better dynamic range than this. Obviously, we're looking at an APS-C camera and also a Micro Four Thirds camera. If you need full frame, this is the cheapest you're really gonna get that's new. You wanna use as a backup camera to your 5D Mark IV or to your 5D Mark III, I don't know. But at the end of the day, just go out and shoot, have fun, take some good photos. And I do have a 5D Mark IV versus 6D Mark II comparison video coming soon, so stay tuned for that. And yeah, if you want to pick up one of these cameras, I'll have a link in the description. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you dislike this video, give it a thumbs down twice. I'll see you in the next one.